Well, hello there and welcome back to Faith, Culture, Politics in Australia with Mark. Glad to have you on board. Today I've got a regular guest that appeared a few times during 2025, and this is the first time I'm getting to catch up with him and in good time, seeing everything that's going on in regards to some rushed legislation and that as well. But before I bring our guest on, just a reminder that if you'd like to support myself and the work that I'm doing, you can do so via Buy Me a Coffee as well, or via PayID info@fcpaustralia.com to support independent media. But let's bring on our guest, Michael Arbon. And g'day there, Michael. Good to see you again. Assistant to Senator Ralph Babet.
Yeah, g'day, Mark. Pleasure to see you. 2026. I'm still getting used to saying that number.
Yeah, pretty crazy. We caught up on a few things last year, and it seems like we're only just chatting about that Christmas, New Year's rolled over, and 2026 almost seems like there was no break between 2025. We've kind of just rolled into normal political sphere and everything else that's going on.
Yeah, it's funny. Parliament was supposed to resume in February, but here we are, having already had a first sitting in a very reactionary sitting where things were very rushed. So I guess we've got a lot to talk about today in terms of the process and what happens in Parliament, and how governments can sometimes wet the bed and pass laws way too quick that have a bunch of unintended consequences.
Oh, yeah, no, absolutely right. Now, it is good to have you back, obviously, because last year there was a bit of question about you still being able to work with Senator Ralph Babet. Now, that's been resolved, obviously, as well. So that's good to hear.
Yeah, there was a reduction in staffing, so Senator Babet had to make a bit of a tough call. He sort of needed me in the sitting weeks because I'm the one that sort of understands the parliamentary procedure and has those connections within Parliament and stuff. So he's got me back on to help him out with the sittings, which is great. It's nice to remain involved in that place, because if you vacate it, well, someone else is going to maybe push something through that people won't notice.
Yeah, no, exactly right. Now, obviously, as people would expect, one of the big things that we're going to be unpacking is this bill that was rammed through yesterday in the Parliament after some amendments and that. And this is the Combatting Antisemitism, Hate, Extremism, Criminal and Migration Laws Bill 2026, which just went through the lower house, but also passed through the Senate, voted 38 to 22. So we're going to really unpack that a little bit. And you're quite active on social media as well. Follow you on X and also on Facebook, and you put this up as well. This is pretty much the voting record for this is the Senate I'm looking at here. That's correct, yeah?
That's correct, yeah. So I guess the House for the Labor Party is, they always have passage because they have the numbers there, but it's the Senate where things can get stuck if the coalition or the Greens decide to oppose the Labor position.
Yeah, and I guess one of the big things that I only picked up on this because I listened to Ralph Babet talking to someone the other day, it might have even been in the last 24 hours, is the size of the bill. Now, we're talking about 500 pages and how quickly it come about and written. I mean, this is extensive law and writing. Is it unusual for something like this chunky to be brought to Parliament as quickly as it has, Michael, like historically?
If you take a long-term view, yes. If you look at the history of Australia, it's very strange to pass a far-reaching bill with a ton of pages quickly and guillotine it through both houses. But under this Labor government, it's actually not been that uncommon. They have jammed a whole bunch of bills through really quickly on a number of occasions. And it all boils back to one simple theory, which I think has been proven true, is that time is not a government's best friend. If they can push a bill through quickly, the people don't have enough time to understand it. The politicians don't even have enough time to understand it. And you don't get enough public backlash, and it flies through Parliament. Whereas if you look at one example where we did have time, which was a misinformation, disinformation bill, that bill was given a number of months for public consultation and feedback and a committee, and that failed simply because the Australian people had enough time to comprehend what they were trying to do.
Mm. And I guess the reason that they're saying that they wanted to rush this through is get on top of it is, I mean, obviously the tragic events that unfolded in Bondi, right? No one disputes that that is tragic, and we need to be addressing a lot of things in this nation, but it really still doesn't justify a bill of this extent being rushed through. What's your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I'm a big fan of Thomas Sowell, the economist's work, and he says there are no solutions, there are only trade-offs. And in this case, the government has traded off wanting to be seen to be doing something for an element of our free speech and our freedom of association rights. They have traded away some element of those for them to be seen to be doing something, when in reality, I think the real problem we have with Australia at the moment, it's actually being reflected in the polls, is it's just a lack of principled leadership in government, but also in opposition. There is a real lack of that principled leadership, that a real leader in this circumstance would step up and say, this is a tragedy. We have existing laws. We're going to go through. And they launched a private inquiry, but also a royal commission. So they're doing the work to find out what the cause was. But what they've done, instead of actually doing the work and understanding whether any legislation changes are needed or not, they've just rushed through a bill to be seen to be doing something which will have a whole bunch of unintended consequences. You know, a decent leader would say, we will enforce the laws that we have to make sure this is not repeated. It's clear there's some issues, but we don't need new laws to fix it.
Yeah, and they could have just tightened the ones or acted upon the ones they currently have. So, I mean, there's just so much wrong with this. Now, apparently, there's been a section pulled out. Now, this is why Andrew Hastie come out and said that he passed it because of what was able to be pulled out of it, and he believed that was the biggest issue. So, what was that? What did that involve?
Yeah, so there was a disgusting piece in the original draft by the Labor government, which was sort of an anti-vilification provision. So that was a real speech silencing element. It was sort of an offence around promoting hatred, and hate's a very subjective term, Mark. It's very hard to define, and each individual would perceive hate to be a different thing. I'm one who believes that the right to free speech trumps the need for hate speech laws. I believe people should be able to say things that maybe not politically correct, that differ in opinion, not leading towards violence. That's a different thing. Violence is already illegal. But when you have a different opinion, which someone deems to be hateful because their feelings are hurt, that is completely unacceptable to be outlawed. I think we should let stupid people say stupid stuff so we can call it stupid and combat it with good information. I think that's the best way for a democracy to function.
Yeah, no, I totally agree, and I'm doing a bit of research. I'm looking at putting a short article together in regards to this. And one of the concerns for me when I was looking at it, because a lot of free speech advocates and people on our side, you know, conservative Christian worldview, still have massive concerns around the structure of this bill and what it could lead to. Now, one of the concerns for me is if you have a look at people like Bernard Gaynor or even Kirley Smith with their vilification laws and calling out trans men and all this sort of things that are going on that have been taken to court over. Now these are in a different sphere. They're state-based laws that have been addressed in with these two. But the concern that I have and that people are raising is that this federal legislation, this federal bill, will actually put that sort of on steroids and open up the door even further for federal laws to attack someone like Kirley or Bernard. What's your thoughts on that?
Yeah, it's hard to know how this law would interact with those sorts of things. I did notice there was a reference included to state and territory laws that was added in. So what they did was originally it was one big bill, 141 pages, which was going to, initiate the guns elements, but also the hate speech elements. They split it in half. And they removed some of that vilification stuff, but there was an additional reference. I'll try and find out what we're speaking, but to sort of state and federal laws that sort of were captured under the definition of a hate crime. So if you were to, here it is, would constitute an offence against a provision of a law of a state or territory as in force at the time of commencement of this section. So essentially, they've tied in state and territory crimes into this federal law as well. we haven't had enough time to really understand what that means, because we'll have to go through the relevant, trace it back to those relevant laws and see how it intertwine. But bottom line is that the definition of a hate crime is pretty broad. And I don't know about you, but the definition of a hate crime is a very, very difficult thing to try and define. I don't even know if you can do it. And what I think is the most egregious thing is just at the beginning of the bill, they describe the object of the prohibited hate groups. So that element of the bill where they're trying to prohibit certain hate groups. And it says the object of this part is to protect the Australian community or part of the Australian community against social, economic, psychosocial and physical harm, and from the promotion of violence by prohibiting organisations that engage in, prepare or plan to engage in or assist the engagement in or advocate engaging in conduct constituting a hate crime. It's a dog's breakfast. Good luck trying to interpret that law and how it applies. But I just read, harm to the Australian community in terms of social, economic, psychological and physical. Well, all of those four things have been perpetrated on the Australian people over the years by their own government. So I know that they're trying to keep the prohibited hate groups quite narrow initially to be, they say the neo-Nazis and what's it called? Hezbollah Tahrir is that is that other organization. But I just worry into the future whether it expands beyond those two groups of people, and who may be captured, maybe unknowingly, for being loosely associated with a group that ends up being called a hate group. That's dangerous, and that could easily be politicized, because it's the government of the day that gets to determine what a hate group is. I think at the very minimum I hate this law entirely, but if you were going to have the law and you wanted to define a hate group, that proposed hate group should also have to pass both houses of parliament. Your politicians should have to vote in favour of them being declared a hate group, because we elect those politicians to make those decisions.
Yeah, it's a big thing, and I know I'm sort of a little bit focusing on the faith-based aspect of it, being a Christian. But if you have a look, obviously for us, there's been a lot of pushback. If you look, moral norms, invites persuasion and disagreement, the Christian worldview. Whereas in contrast, there's obviously some doctrines, there's a big, obviously this is where big conversations about is a certain doctrine calls for the killing of unbelievers, mandate physical punishment for dissent, authorize violence in the name of their belief. Now, there's a big difference between those two views, and one you could openly argue and say, well, you can actually come down hard on anything that promotes violence, as opposed to someone's moral worldview that isn't, this is the distinction that I guess coming from a Christian and looking at other worldview. I don't know what your thoughts are on that.
The question is, do you need a hate crimes law to be able to prosecute someone for urging violence? Probably not. I would say that's already a crime. Intending to harm someone, intending to engage in violence, there's intent there. Do you need to have a new law to do that? Probably not. I think the consequences of these additional laws, which were rushed, we don't yet know. There's also aggravated offences for preachers and leaders. That's non-specific. That's not attached to just one specific religion or one specific worldview. And as someone who's a Christian who believes in a biblical worldview, is it hateful for me to believe in biblical marriage, to promote pro-life causes? That's a biblical thing. But to some others with a secular worldview, that might be seen as hateful or offensive. It's a really slippery slope. I don't like all new laws. I don't think they're going to come down with a heavy hand of the law on everyone initially. They'll probably do not much at all. That's normally how it works. The law passes, we all yell and scream, we all get really worried about it, and you don't really see anything of that law for a long period of time. You don't see it being enforced, but then maybe one day into the future, when there's a crisis or some major event triggers it, that law can then be used to put people away. So you've got to be very careful what laws you pass.
Yeah, no, absolutely right. And this is the thing, even through the recent COVID, the pandemic era, I wasn't aware that even in South Australian legislation, there was something as part of the Emergency Management Act, even at the time, that said that they could enforce medical procedures as part of that legislation that was already in law. Now, they obviously didn't go down that path, but they definitely did coercion and lots of other things. But that was already in the legislation, and obviously now it's been put on steroids. So it's very, I mean, these laws are all written there, ready, and they could implement them at any time. And then our law enforcement or anybody else, our courts, would have to adhere to them. And this is the worry, isn't it? Because once these bills are in, it takes a lot of effort to get this sort of stuff back out, right?
And it takes the will of an elected leader or an elected party to want to repeal bills. I think, once the storm passes, this becomes something no one talks about in 2 weeks' time. Remember, the hate crimes bill passed in February of 2025. Have you heard anyone speak about that this month? No. It's law. It's happened. Maybe it hasn't been acted on very much at all yet. But the time will come when these laws are abused or weaponized. That's when we'll talk about it again, when it's too late. It would be amazing one day to have a party of government that maybe instead of putting an omnibus hate crimes bill through, puts through an omnibus repeal bill, which actually repeals any legislation which they believe infringes on the human rights of Australian people. A legislator's job is not to make more rules, it's to preserve liberty for its citizens, and that mindset's completely out the window. Now, government thinks they're God and they can fix problems, and that's incredibly dangerous, Mark.
No, I absolutely agree with that, and that is the problem when legislators and government believe that they should have the power to dictate what you can and can't do in life. I mean, that undermines I guess the Christian principle, but also libertarian worldview, conservative worldviews as well. And this is, so it's very, very dangerous grounds we work on. But the problem we have, Michael, and this is where I think a lot of people are frustrated, because ultimately this bill was allowed to pass with Liberal support, right? So Liberal Party support. Now, that is very counterintuitive, I guess, if you look at their mission statement, that page, and what we believe. What's just happened goes totally against what they believe. I mean, people just can't believe that the Liberal Party has gone this way, and that's why I guess they're on the nose as much as they are.
So the Liberals will claim that they managed to split the bill, voted against the guns, and improve the hate speech element of the bill, right? Hat tip to Alex Antic, he just voted hard no, because he's a classical Liberal who understands the values of liberalism. If you've ever read Friedrich Hayek, you'll understand what a classical Liberal is versus a conservative. I'd say the Liberal Party themselves have voted more in a conservative way here, because they believe that a new law would give them the power to mass deport people that may pose a threat to Australia, and they would believe that that's in Australia's best interest to deport a bunch of jihadis. The problem with passing a law like that, which I don't think is necessary anyway, because I do believe the government already has the power to deport people who need to be deported. They sent Novak Djokovic back for not taking a vaccination, for goodness sake. I think they have the powers. But the problem here is that, once again, politicians are trying to capitalize on public sentiment to be seen to be doing something. And in the process of doing that, just like they did the entire way through the pandemic, they're creating a whole bunch of unnecessary legislation and unintended consequences. And I also want to praise the National Party, who had the courage to vote against the bill last night in the Senate. I'd say Antic and Canavan have emerged as the two leaders of the Liberal National Party in terms of having solid values that they vote by every time. They've done an excellent job. But then you've got the reliables in, One Nation and Babet, etc., that are doing the right thing straight away and saying no. Because you read the first page and this is something that Australia doesn't need. And then you've also got the likes of the Greens, who ended up becoming our friend on this bill, but only because they really wanted to go harder. It's not because they truly value liberty and free speech. They just wanted to make sure that certain other fringe elements of of our society were able to capitalise on such laws, which is not acceptable. And then you've got David Pocock and Senator Payman and Tammy Tyrrell were the other three, Mark, that voted the right way in the Senate, all for various reasons. I actually don't mind Pocock. I think he's might have a different worldview in terms of climate change, etc., but he does value parliamentary process. He doesn't like it when they rush things through, and he's more than happy to stick his neck out and say, no, you've got to do it right or I'm voting no. So I sort of appreciate that, as much as, you know, he may not have the core values that align with ours. He's still a useful member of the crossbench to sort of expose the lack of transparency of the government.
Yeah, and you're right. And I mean, we've got to be fair when we do assess these sorts of things, because, you know, if someone that might not be ideologically or aligned with our worldview or whatever, but if they follow the principles of what it should be, and I think Australians should be really concerned that that their members of parliament weren't actually able to properly represent them in this case with these things being rushed through. I mean, that's one of the biggest concerns for the people that vote people into parliament, is that they didn't have time.
Yeah. Look, I can tell you right now, so in the lower house, they tabled these separate two bills yesterday. I think it was the criminal and migration elements, which is what we're focusing on here, even though the gun stuff's horrible as well. That was only tabled at like 10 a.m. and it passed the lower house 3 hours later. And it was heavily amended. It was improved in some ways, but there are other elements added throughout the bill that I still don't understand what the implications of it are. And the bill that was passed through Parliament, it may have been slightly improved, but it was still a bad bill. And that was not the bill that the committee inquiry was about last week, where everyone put their public submissions in. That's not the bill that passed Parliament. The bill that passed was split and amended, and only revealed to the politicians and the general public a few hours before it was jammed through Parliament on a guillotine motion. You know, we had a list of dozens of speakers in the Senate. They only got less than halfway through it. You know, none of our guys got to speak at all. It was just put to a vote, and at about 10:30 last night, it was all over, including any amendments that were voted down.
Yeah, it's just way too quick, and it's really bypasses proper democratic processes as far as I'm concerned. But this brings me obviously to things that we've talked about before, and people know that I'm part of Australians for Better Government, is that this is the problem when you have Labor and Liberal predominantly controlling the upper house, the Senate, or even a legislative council. Now, I do note back in, I think it was Whitlam's time and stuff like that, where Labor was in power and Liberals had the power in the Senate, and they blocked a lot of bills and stuff. So you can have that. But this is where the view is that we believe there should be an unbiased group of senators in the Senate that aren't necessarily politically aligned with any of the major parties, that actually really question bills like this, and that's what it's designed for. Now, people are obviously concerned about, that's just going to take things too much time, and it's going to slow things down too much. And I was talking to my friend Bruce Pay about this, and he was of that view in the past, but he goes, it is for this exact reason of what happened over the last couple of days that his views actually changed. He said we actually do need more restraint in the Senate or the Legislative Council. What's your thoughts on that?
Yeah, time's our friend, like I mentioned earlier. But I love the concept of having a Senate that's not party aligned, but I think, knowing human nature, they're probably going to end up forming allegiances and some sort of de facto alliances anyway, in terms of over time you'll have, the Tills aren't a political party, but we all know who the Tills are and we know how they're going to vote. I feel like something similar would end up happening in the Senate, just to play devil's advocate. It may not be quite as bad if you don't have the rules to vote along party line. There might be a little bit more, because the parties create their own rules. If you're in the Labor Party, you have to toe the line. If you're in the Liberal Party, you get a little bit more flex. But if you are in the shadow cabinet, maybe you're more forced to vote with the party than if you're a backbencher. You have a bit more liberty to vote freely. I think the solution, which is hard to achieve, is to try and democratize our political parties as much as humanly possible. And we don't have a lot of democratic political parties, even though we're a democracy. Probably the Libs are as close as you can get to democratic in terms of voting on pre-selection. Giving members an actual vote is powerful. You know, minor parties don't have the luxury of a big enough membership or a strong enough organisation to do that, and often that's why the minor party vote is capped as well, is because people will join as a member, but then they might realise after a few months they're just a donor. Your membership doesn't give you a vote in any part of the process at all, and I think that's going to be one of the challenges for One Nation. I hope they're able to democratise and scale up, because at the moment you're a bit of a sole trader. Pauline's been plugging away for decades trying to build a brand, but the time comes when you have to publicly list your company, engage shareholders and give them a vote at the AGM and give them the chance to pre-select candidates and feedback policy, etc. And that is a real challenge, isn't it? If you want to become a party of government, you've got to sort of reach that scale. But then in the Libs, you have the infighting and the factions, which also comes with that democratic process, comes a bit more chaos, doesn't it? Which is also really hard to manage unless you have a strong and charismatic leader. I think that seems to unite parties if they can get that strong leader who they can actually all get behind and say, well, it's not perfect, but it's good enough. Let's make it work. We haven't seen that for a long time, Mark. And sort of, I think that's what Australia is craving at the moment. The vote's splitting like crazy, which I think's okay. People are thinking, they're considering, but then eventually to form government and to challenge the Labor Party, who is in government, but let's face it, they're not that popular. Their policies are not great, but they're sort of in government as a result of the chaos that's sort of in the opposition at the moment. And I do hope that levels out. I hope we can all find a way to work together and form good government, but it's going to take time and probably a lot more pain in the short term.
You're absolutely right there, and this is really sort of played on me a little bit. I heard it before, because you did mention about being on the shadow front bench. I believe some of the national front bench, shadow front bench people could be in a bit of strife for crossing the floor. Now I think there was 3 of them that crossed the floor when in that. So could that be like, could they be forced to resign, or what's the process there?
Yeah, I think the party room decides on that. I did notice that there was a show of support for those senators when David Littleproud, he actually came into the Senate chamber and sat on the back seat while they were voting against the coalition. So I think that's a bit of a show of unity from the Nationals to say, you know, it's not just 1 or 2 people who are rebels. We're all going to be in this together, and we don't believe this bill is right. I think the best person that's done the best analysis so far is actually Matt Canavan. Last night he did about half an hour live on Facebook just before the bill passed, and he sort of went through it and cut through all the pain points that he had in the bill. He has no issue with putting people away who are engaging in violence. I don't think any of us does, but his issues were mainly around the rushed process, the lack of free speech, and just a whole bunch of elements which we actually don't know how they're going to play out. So I think the Nats will face I'm not sure. Susan Ley might get the call on it. I'm not really sure how it works within the Nationals, but I do hope they keep their roles, because what they did was a classical Liberal thing. It's not perfect. It's not right. We think it might infringe on the human rights of the Australian people. We have to vote no. And any sensible person, and I was really disappointed in Susan Ley, who came out and pretty much said the bill was unsalvageable 5 or 6 days ago, but then still re-engaged in that negotiation. I think she should have hung her elbow out to dry. I think this bill is so messy it could never be fixed right. Wait for the Royal Commission, and if then a minor tweak is required to deport people that need to be deported, maybe then a narrow bill would be required. But a broad bill right now, it's crazy.
Yeah, and I know we're spending a little bit of time on this, but I think it's really important because it's a big issue, right? So where do you think, obviously, the focus has been taken in all of these discussions is the radical element of Islamic ideology, is the radical part of Islamic ideology, and Labor or anybody else doesn't actually want to talk about what actually created the day, right? So they're doing everything else. They're talking about stripping away guns from law-abiding Australian citizens, millions of them, and they're looking at everything else in regards to speech, as opposed to looking at the actual issue. What's your sort of consideration on that?
Yeah, it's classic politics, isn't it? It's just a deflection. So, you know, a radical Islamist, or two of them, go and, you know, engage in a terrorist attack, killing a bunch of innocent Australians, and then they're like, well, what we'll do is we'll restrict guns and we'll limit speech. That's not how you deal with this issue. It almost stinks a little bit, Mark, because it's so quick for them to draft these bills, that these ideas are not new, that these ideas have been sitting there for a while, and there's nothing like a crisis in order to pass legislation that you've been wanting to pass for a while, that in a normal sort of peaceful period may not have enough traction. I think they've jammed these elements through. It's not like the concept of hate speech and hate crimes hasn't been floating around globalist think tanks for the last decade or two. We've seen those terms plenty of times in certain documents, and this is probably a chance to codify it and pass it through the parliament. I have no doubt that, yeah, these ideas are not brand new, and they've chosen their timing, thinking that the Australian people are looking for a response and thinking that this will resonate. But in reality, I think the latest political polling is probably very flawed, because we're in a time of fear, and we're in a time when people are they're not craving laws, they're actually craving leadership. And I think that's why we've seen the spike so massive for One Nation in the short term, because they've been consistent on these issues, and people are like, well, if you're not willing to step up, maybe, just maybe, I'll flick my vote over Pauline for now. Time will tell in 2 years' time whether that maintains or shrinks back, but it's pretty high right now. And you've just put up that Resolve poll there showing that, yeah, One Nation is sitting on 18, which is pretty massive for a minor party. That's a guaranteed senator, and maybe half a senator as well in some states around Australia, which is quite powerful. It's probably not quite enough to win lower house seats yet. Let's be honest, you've got to win 51% of the vote to win a lower house seat, or 50+1, which is a lot. But in some regional seats, maybe they're getting into that two-party preferred and really pushing Labor or the Libs for a seat on that polling. And I saw another one out this morning from Freshwater. It's very, very new. That showed, was it Labor 33, Libs 28, and One Nation up to 19, which is
this one here is 21.
Yeah.
So this other one
that was the Roy Morgan one. Yeah. So
that was 20,
and then Freshwater's
January 20th.
even newer this morning, showing them at 19. So there's a lot of consistent polling between 15 and 23% there for One Nation at the moment, which is quite powerful. But it's not a surprise to me when you see the leadership of the major parties at the moment, and really the lack of difference between their responses to what's occurred in Bondi. It's you know, Susan Ley unfortunately was calling for Parliament to be recalled, which turns out to be a pretty silly idea, because if you're recalling Parliament, you're going to rush something through that may not be right. It's important that you follow the correct process. Call for the Royal Commission by all means, because there's all sorts of errors that have been made by this government which may have contributed to this sort of environment, but there's no need to rush legislation yet.
No, and you did share another one which I thought was a good little GIF meme. Is this time it's a lesser of two evils. It's you know, vote the same way all the time, and you know, let's just flop between Labor and Liberal, unfortunately. So yeah, it's I'll be
and the wording of that post. Do you mind if I elaborate on that, Mark? So the reason I posted that was I wanted to show the potential of someone who joins a democratic political party and how powerful your vote can be, just compared to voting on election day. Because I don't think, a lot of us whinge. So a lot of the Australian people are like, oh, I have to vote at an election. That's such a chore. I don't want to do it. And they go and vote, and who they didn't want to get elected ends up getting elected. And then they whinge about how much they suck. But, you know, at that level, your vote is like 1 in 120,000. Yeah, it's a vote. It's important that you do it. But the impact you have on the outcomes of our nation are very minimal. Please keep voting. Definitely vote. Value your preferences. But you can take one step further and join a political party. You don't even have to vote for that party, number one. But join a party that's close to you. I think it's really important. And in your local electorate, there might be anywhere between 20 and 500 members that vote to pre-select your candidate that's going to run at that election. Some electorates have literally a couple dozen people that vote. So your vote is worth 4 or 5% when you vote in that pre-selection, and you actually get to choose who the candidate is that runs. And that candidate has a pretty good chance of becoming your local member of parliament. So instead of your vote on election day being something teeny tiny, you're actually choosing who the person is. And if the person that gets in this time you don't like, in 3 years' time at that pre-selection, you vote for someone else. You ask someone else to run, and you make sure that they take their job and they do the job properly. I think it's so important that we get that message out there, Mark, because we need to push for the democratization of our political parties in Australia. All of them on the right who preach democracy, we should be urging them to be democratic at all levels. We need to make sure that the members have power and the members have the ability to hold the elected members to account, because an elected member is pretty anonymous in Parliament, but it's those who select them at pre-selection that are probably paying the most attention. And if they're voting the wrong way, and you are one of 24 people that rolled up to that pre-selection meeting, when you go to the next branch meeting next month, you're going to say, hey, Mark, why'd you vote that way on the hate crimes bill? I don't think I can support you anymore. And they're going to get really worried. And they're going to have to go back and abide by the values that you elected them to represent. So I think making sure we keep pressure on our politicians, not just from screaming on social media or one vote on election day, but between elections by being actively involved in politics is really important, because that influence, it's not really a coercive influence. What it is it's an influence that keeps them on the track. Because I know probably better than most that the people in Canberra, a lot of them do go there with good intentions. They get wrapped up in that Canberra bubble, and they get wrapped up in a whole bunch of self-importance, thinking that they are lawmakers and they must always make laws. And there's not enough people in their inner circle just keeping them grounded in the real world and what the people want, which is usually less of them being involved in their life.
Yeah, true that. And I think that you summed it up in this was part of that post and that where that GIF is, but you summed it up is that apathy is perhaps the biggest problem in Australian politics. And this is the challenge. So, I mean, add to this, if I bring it back to, say, South Australia now, Michael, I've done a video on this before. We've got 160,000 people that just chose not to vote, right? That actually didn't turn up. Now, that's nearly two Legislative Council members, right? That could have been like a One Nation or United Voice or whoever it is, right? I'm not sort of putting it out who for. But so you had, I think it was about 120,000 that just purely, that were registered to vote, that didn't vote. And then you had 40,000 that, donkey voted. So they just did a dummy ballot. So 160,000. And current Legislative Council quota is around the 90 to 100,000. So as I said, that's nearly two Legislative Council members for people that are just apathetic and gone, oh, the system's so broken, I'm not going to play anymore. And I get that sentiment. There's so much to be disappointed about. But at the end of the day, you can't then also go away and go, oh, it sucks. Nothing's going to change and everything else like that. But what I really wanted to focus on, there's that one part about that. But one of the things, and you and I have kind of had, you've had a little bit of a different mindset as me, because I'm very passionate about what's happened through COVID and that Liberal was in power during that time. And I see this now as just another real nail in the coffin, as far as I'm concerned, for any support that I would ever give to Liberal Party. And the reason I'm premising that is that you and I have spoken before about the type of people that are on the ballot for the Legislative Council here in South Australia for the Liberal Party. We've seen the factions play out. We know that these people are strong, conservative-minded people that are candidates. But for me, what worries me the most is the machinations and the power brokers still behind the party, whether at the state level or the federal level, gives me absolutely no confidence. So as for me, and you may have a different aspect to this and why I'm bringing it up, for me, I'm going to be encouraging people to look at all those parties that I'm aware of that are centre right conservative. Now I'm talking, One Nation, I'm talking United Voice Australia, I'm talking Family First, and I'm talking Fair Go, and they're the ones off the top of my head that they have a bit of a more of a conservative leaning. Now my message is going to be, I'm sorry, regardless of whether you're a really strong conservative person looking to put your hand up in the Legislative Council or even any other seat, I really just can't support a Liberal in any way, shape or form, especially after today. So we had them through COVID being tyrannical. We've had them with other things that have really, Liberals sided with Labor here in South Australia with the Emergency Management Act and putting that on steroids, right? So they sided with them. I know that you in the past you've gone, yeah, I get it, but are you still feeling that way, that you feel
Yeah.
give them a chance? Like, people got to give them a chance. Where do you stand? Because I'm not willing to give them a chance. That's kind of where I'm at.
When I vote, I don't vote for a party. I'm always, my mindset personally is I'm voting for individuals who portray the values and principles that I hold dear. So I always vote below the line. I'm a bit of a nerd. I get to know every candidate. And I'm going to number those individuals on who I believe has the right character, the right values, the right principles, and who I think is going to be able to be held to those positions. And then if they do get elected and they don't act that way, I'll vote differently next time. But I'm just going to use my best judgment as to who I think is the best person for that job. And I'm going to number them 1 to whatever, how many candidates there are. If there's 41 candidates, it's usually the Australian Greens candidate that gets number 41. And, you know, in the 1 to 10, it's probably going to be those candidates that you discussed before, but there are a bunch of good people running for the Liberal Party in the Legco as well. So if I think they are a better person for the job, I'll put them higher. If I don't, I would put them lower. But I'm going to test those people. I'm going to go to some events, see how they speak, go check out their social media and see if they are actually promoting classical liberal values, which is what I believe in. I'm more of a classical liberal than a conservative. And the reason for that is I believe that if you have firm, strong values and you are strong on your position in terms of free speech, personal responsibility, individual rights, and not seeing the people as a collective or dividing them by race and gender, etc., which some conservatives fall into the trap of doing as well. I think that's the best way to run a society, one which empowers the individual. But the trouble is a lot of people who run for parliament fall for becoming a career politician, doing what they think is popular rather than what is the right thing to do. And I'm not interested in that. I'm interested in doing the right thing, not what they believe will please the opinion polls or mean that they'll maintain their job. If they're that kind of person, they value their job more than they value democracy, and that's not good enough for me.
Which is something, you know, the things that we talk about Alex Andrich a lot, and he's been very principled in a lot of this. So he's kind of your classic example of someone that you'd be looking for as a candidate in the state election. And look, I'm going to you know, obviously reaffirm what you were just saying, because my messaging when I've done some of my videos is number below the line and choose your candidates in order. Now you go to a bit more of an extent than me. Like, you number every box and look at it that way. I was encouraging people to say, look, at least do your minimum 12, if not more, but make sure that they're the ones that align with your values and belief systems, and mark them, because that's the best way. But what you're saying, what's even better, which is where a lot of people get it wrong because they worry about messing up the boxes and all that, but is actually numbering every single box and putting the people that least align with your worldview right at the very end. And that's kind of been my messaging for people in the videos that I've done as well. And I think it's really, really important to do that. So vote below the line and mark your candidates in the order of, you know, closest alignment to your values and worldview, and one's furthest away. I agree.
And at very least, the last couple of candidates you select, if you don't go the whole way, they need to be what we would call the lesser of two evils, but they need to be the get out of jail option that you know is probably going to get in. Worst case, you need to work out what is worse. Is it a Labor government or a Liberal government? And that final option, you do need a get out of jail option, because if your vote exhausts and it's not counted at all, so you select 5 candidates, but all 5 get knocked out early, guess what? Everyone else's vote is worth a fraction more because your vote doesn't count at all because it's expired. So it's important to make your vote count, even if it's for a candidate that's not perfect, but they're just good enough. That's better than having someone else's vote count and not yours.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Very, very, very important. You know, so we've got a big test coming up for us, because you're based in South Australia, the same as me. So March is going to be, you know, really, really interesting. So the idea is to give people as much information as possible to be able to vote correctly. And you know, obviously one of those things is going to continue to be is those that have sat on the sidelines and just been registered to vote and not vote. Get out there and maybe do it this time. Give there's possibly, apart from Liberal and Labor and Greens, there's possibly two to three legislative council spots for a liberal conservative leaning kind of worldview. So it's really about participating and getting involved, and don't be apathetic, but work together, because this is the whole thing. It's so divided. And again, I mean, that's just the way our democracy works. I mean, we've got four parties that are sort of similarly aligned, stepping up. And look, and this is one of the reasons I stepped back, because from my run, is because the sheet was getting way too long, and divvy up the votes too much. It just messes it up. And that's going to be my focus going forward between now and March, is helping South Australians to be able to look, or I guess, the ones that have our worldview, because we know that, I'm not talking into Greens voters, and I'm not talking into Labor voters, but you never know. There could be some on the fence that gone, we've really got to look at something a little bit differently. But ultimately, I'm talking to people that are sort of more on that conservative side, or classical liberal side that would vote that way. So, yeah, very, very, very interesting days coming up for us. Now, we did have something else. I think you shot through. I can't remember what it was now, but that we're going to.
I think we're just going to talk about gold and how crazy gold has gone.
Yeah, now there's a thing, because you're a finance man, so we're going to talk into that a little bit, and then Bruce and I talk about it on our podcast, and silver's really cracking on as well. So yeah, let's get your thoughts on that.
I love to have a good crack at the Reserve Bank of Australia, especially after all the mistakes they made in COVID with funding the banks with a whole bunch of cheap money for 3 years at 0.1%. That was an absolute cash cow for our banks that they did not need. It's outrageous. But there was another thing I want to raise, Mark, that back in the 1990s, they sold, what was it, 3/4 of our gold holdings, and it made them about $2.5 billion. But if they didn't sell it at the time, Mark, it'd now be worth about $33 billion. So even if you factor in if the sale funds were invested in non-gold assets, we're still about $23 billion worse off than we would have been if we just sat on that gold. So there's a lot of, hindsight is a wonderful thing, but I am appalled by the lack of appetite for gold that exists in government, in RBA, in our authorities. They believe that our fiat currency is going to maintain its value due to just trust. But as trust erodes in our political system or in our politicians, is it any wonder why our dollar seems to be not buying very much anymore, when it's linked to nothing but trust? It's just a piece of paper. That's all it is. And I think it's kind of fun to go back to that macro level every now and then, and just that big picture, and think, well, what is money? Oh, I only believe that note's worth $50 because you say it is, and I think it is. If I didn't think it was, it would just be a piece of paper that's worthless. And we are always right on the edge financially, and I think it's important for people to understand that.
Yeah, and again, this is something that Bruce loves to unpack, because you say he brings his splice up, and he said, I used to be able to buy a splice at the shops for 15 cents or something, and now you're paying like $3 something for a splice. And he goes, well, there's inflation, that's where it is. He said technically it should actually be cheaper, because improvements in processes and everything else like that, and en masse, all these things should have improved. But but a lot of, I mean, you're a monies guy. You work in finance yourself. I'm looking at it because I've come to the party very late in a lot of stuff. I had my head down, just getting on with life and raising a family. But a lot of stuff seem to have happened in the 70s, the early to mid 70s, late 70s, and it really, the gold standard, a lot of change, the monetary system changed. Like, it just seems like there's a lot of stuff that happened that seems way too much of a coincidence just to be sort of just an organic thing. What's your thoughts on that?
Yeah, you're right. The departure from the gold standard, the full fiat currency, so moving away from the British pound, all of those things, and then I guess modern economics is really it's a theory, isn't it? This whole economic system we're in at the moment, that we can just forever water down the value of our currency by creating more through the banks or through printing every now and then when we have a crisis, and everything will be okay. what I'm trying to do over time, and I'm sure you're the same, is just to educate the people that $1 million house, that's the same house that you lived in 5 years ago that was $500,000, is still worth the same amount of money. It's still just one house with 3 bedrooms, 1 bathroom, and a garage. It's just a house. And even though they say it's worth $1 million, the reality is what's happened is your $500,000 is they're worth 50 cents each. The value of your dollar, your buying power of your dollar has reduced. The house hasn't actually gone up in value. There's just more money in circulation, which reduces the value of every dollar. I think people sort of lose that concept, but they do see it in their everyday life. You know, you go and buy a loaf of bread 5 years ago, it might have been $3 and now you're paying $6. The same thing's happened. The loaf of bread hasn't increased in value. The value of your dollar has halved. So therefore it costs you twice as much. And because it happens slowly, like all things, and because you see your super fund going up in value, it looks okay. And your house is going up in value, it looks okay. But if your income isn't increasing at the same rate as the big expenses in your life, your quality of life's actually reducing. And if you have a look at recent economic data, Australian CPI increases most quarters, right? We'll say that, you know, our economy is getting bigger. But what's causing that is largely, in the most recent 2 to 3 years anyway, is population growth. And if you look at CPI per capita, so per individual person, are we any better off? We're largely going backwards for more quarters than we're going forwards. So we are getting smaller slices of the same pie. And that's no reason to give up or play victim. I think, you know, you can still work hard and make a good living in Australia. I think too often we focus on the negative. I do it myself. It's a natural thing. You can still make a good living. You can still get ahead. But I think knowing these sorts of things helps people to understand that they do need to make their money work for them. They do need to invest in hard assets. And unfortunately, saving money in the bank used to be excellent, but now it loses value really quickly. So your money has to work harder for you. And that's why we do see people taking silly risks with their money as well. But you do have to invest it. You do have to use it. Otherwise, it does lose value very quickly.
And I think one of the real frustrating things, apart from obviously losing that much money on the value of the dollar, is actually, and this is really funny, a lot of people don't actually know that. They, you know, you ask people, and Bruce asked this a couple of times, he said, what do you think that, you know, is the most expensive thing for you as a person in the world? And most people would say, well, it's actually my house, right? The mortgage is the most expensive thing I have. Well, you've quite clearly indicated by sending this through, is that it's actually our government that's the most expensive thing. It's massive, and it's growing exponentially. Now, you wanted to cover a little bit of that as well, right?
Yeah, so I haven't seen the 2025 data yet. I'm not sure if it's out for the full year, but in 2024, I think it was about 80% of all new jobs created in Australia were in the non-market sector. They were partly or solely funded by a shrinking pool of taxpayers, whatever taxpayers are left that aren't relying on taxpayer funds for their living. And I saw this article here, I think, was it from The Economist? Is that right? That sort of compared, it compared the number of public sector workers per 1,000 people, and just have that is not the gold medal that you want to win as a country. It means that you're an incredibly inefficient nation who's heavily dependent on future taxpayer funds just to keep the system alive. You'd prefer to be sitting, dare I say, down there where China is, or Singapore, or even you're starting to go pretty low there instead of Pakistan, etc. But largely, the smaller the public service and the more efficient, the better the economy is going to be longer term, because you have more net taxpayers and less people relying on taxpayers for their living. Was it Tony Abbott that said we need more lifters and less leaners? Well, that's especially true now. It's got an awful lot worse since he was campaigning for government. So that's the other opportunity there for true leadership in the political sphere, is for the opposition and minor parties to step up and start truly advocating for a leaner government. I know you may lose some public service workers that are going to vote for you, but so what? It's for the benefit of the nation that our budget is in surplus. And we have As far as the budget forecast goes, I sit in budget lockdown every week. Every year, I really enjoy that budget lockup day. They're disgusting numbers, but it's fun to read. And we have deficits forecast forever. There is no surplus forecast in our budget at this point in time. It's, as far as the forward estimates go, they're all deficits, and that's not a lack of taxes received. It's simply a function of spending too much money on things that we don't need, and wasting a lot of money through the bureaucracy that's been created over, yeah, you're right, over decades. It's not new. Bureaucracy gets added upon bureaucracy, and I can't remember the last time Australia had a decent reform around taxation or around the expenditure in the budget.
And it's the same here in our state in South Australia. It's the same. They come on and they brag about a couple $100 million surplus in the budget, but the actual debt, the actual interest rate on the state debt is $6 million a day. You know, so that all keeps building. So it's just continuous deficits, and unfortunately this is the thing. So Australians have got so used to the fact that she'll be right, mate. It's always going to be the same, but at some point it's going to come back and bite you in the bum. And this is including to all the public sector workers. Now, sure, you're obviously relying on taxpayer money and the government to pay you, but at some point, your voting has to reflect what's in the best interest of your children and grandchildren, rather than your immediate need. And we've spoken about this before. I've got kids and grandkids. We've got this mentality, it seems like, that we're focusing on the here and now, and we go, oh, you know, whatever, stuff our kids and grandkids, they'll just have to do their own way. And that's not the way we should be thinking, is it?
It's what's in it for me. And I think politics is still downstream from culture. I do believe that, because you see the politicians react, and in their election campaigns, it's, we're giving you. This is free. All of that garbage language, which is complete lies, because there are no resources that the government allocate that aren't taxpayer funds. Everything they do is using money that comes from you, the taxpayer. There is no such thing as free. Someone else is paying. That's what it means. And once again, it's that lack of leadership to be able to really cut through that and say, that's garbage. It's not free. It's being paid for by Mark's taxes. And you know that. Call it what it is. We're going to take some money from you and we're going to reallocate it to someone else, because that's what they're doing whenever they make a promise. And in South Australia, we've seen the recent failure of what we knew was hot air from the beginning, that green hydrogen project. There's a few $100 million there that are likely unable to be recovered. And I didn't see all the details last week, but did Malinowskis announce some sort of green cement project as well with the Hallett Group? I don't think they need taxpayer money. They're a very big, profitable company. And the only reason that a big company would require taxpayer funds is if they're pursuing a project that in the normal world is not profitable and they need to be propped up. If it's not profitable, it's not economic, don't back it. It's garbage. You either stand on your own 2 feet or we don't do it.
Yeah, and this is the thing, isn't it? This is the whole thing with politics. It's ultimately taxpayers when politicians start talking about we're spending your money on this, but we are going to find a way to recoup it, to bring it back into the coffers. You can't just give money to massive multinationals or massive corporations that are, you know, making a profit. Give taxpayer money, other people's money to them, without an expectation that you're going to get the taxpayer is actually going to get a good return. And this is what a lot of people just aren't paying attention to, is it?
No, taxpayer funds should be spent absolutely sparingly. Every cent should be spent wisely, because, well, I'm sure you've looked at your tax bill lately, Mark. It's disgusting. And there are taxes on literally everything, including when you buy your fuel at the service station, there's a tax on a tax. They charge you a fuel excise and the GST on top of the excise. Like, there are stupid details like that, which should be eliminated immediately. But once again, there's no political will there to reduce revenue, because reducing revenue means making some tough decisions to cut some unnecessary expenses, of which there are lots.
And this is what my concern going forward, Michael, is that it seems like Australia, or Australians, are warming to the idea of a socialist environment. Now, the reason I say this is we've still got so many people that are willing to support and vote for Labor and the Greens. Not so much Greens are getting a bit on the nose with people, but in particular Labor. We see the super majorities, or we see the power that they got in the federal. And this is what worries me going forward here in South Australia, is that South Australians are actually warming up to this idea that Big Daddy government is going to protect them from everything, and they continue to vote. And that's just leading down a path of socialism and ultimately even worse, communist ideologies. And that really worries me that so many Australians are actually getting so warming to the current Labor, because Labor wasn't always like that decades and decades ago, but it is the kind of beast it is now.
Yeah, I'm actually going to go back to that political membership angle. Back in the day, a large portion of the Australian people were members of political parties who were actively involved at a grassroots level in politics. So it meant that we actually got better candidates. It meant that candidates were held to account in a better way, in a more robust way. And it meant that you didn't get this class of careerist politicians, because your grassroots level of membership was stacked with real world people who were experiencing the pains of everyday life and understanding that government weren't the solution. The solution was to make sure that government didn't get in their way. And I think it's going to take massive numbers of us being seriously involved in politics, not just commenting, but taking up roles, becoming presidents, becoming serious members of political parties, so that we can shape that reformation that's needed. So we need to reform not the worldview of our existing class of politicians. They need to be wiped out. I'm going to be brutally honest, that if you're elected and you're not doing the right thing now, you need to be replaced with someone who's willing to put it all on the line and maybe be a one-term politician, but to have that conviction to do it properly and not have that mindset of government solving problems, but the mindset of government getting out of the way and allowing the market mechanisms to solve the problems of our world efficiently. Because there's no efficiency in a government solution, because you create a government department. Unfortunately, the human reaction to working in a government department is knowing that the funds are unlimited and they don't have to be efficient. But in the private enterprise, there's limited money, you have to make a profit, so therefore efficiency must be there.
Yeah, no, great, well said. And look, you and I have discussed that we're going to be, we're planning to catch up a little bit more regularly in 2026. We don't want to make it a massive long form podcast, because people are busy but we want to do a more regular thing. I'd love to be able to get you back on again to even unpack the housing situation and that, because you've got some insights in that, and really have a really robust discussion about that as well. But just as we're kind of looking to finish up, this is one of the things that I guess I talk into a little bit, is the people that are now at the stage where they say governments, and voting isn't the only answer. I get that, and you acknowledge that. One of it is getting involved in the political parties, which you're in regards to membership, which is what you've hinted at just there. But we've got and it's growing, a considerable amount of people that are saying that the politics is absolutely a waste of time to do anything with further. We're just going to go onto our groups. We're going to look at our community, gardens and partnerships, and the government is not the answer, and voting is not the answer. We're not going to participate any longer. Now, these, as I've mentioned before, add up to hundreds of thousands, if not over 1 million, all across Australia. And I don't agree with that. I know that politics isn't the only answer, but my point with it is that they will come for you anyway, no matter what you try and do in your groups outside of the political system. They will continue to legislate things harder and harder and harder, where you won't be able to live anyway. So you may as well get involved and try and put decent people into politics. What's your thought? What would you say to those people that have gone, nah, stuff it, government's not for me anymore, I don't want to play the game, I'm not going to get involved?
Sweet. Well, don't whinge about anything government does from here on. So if you're not going to try and reform the system, I know it's very, very hard, and you can't measure success in instant outcomes or you'll quit straight away. You have to have a long-term view. But also I would urge them to read up on history. We live in, I would say, one of the most prosperous and free times of human history. There are plenty of worse regimes that have existed in the past. Our government is far from perfect. I think it was Churchill that said democracy is the worst form of bad government, or something like that. The best form of bad government, something like that, he said. But it's true. There is no such thing as good government, because the human condition is imperfect. We are prone to repeat the mistakes of the past, but you have to take a long-term view. And it's a bit like the parable of the sower in the Bible, right? So in the parable of the sower, you're sowing the seeds, and you can control the seeds that you sow, but you can't control what soil it lands on and what they do with that seed, and whether that seed grows into a beautiful crop, or whether that seed withers away really quickly. But I would suggest people to keep sowing, to keep speaking the truth, and continue marching forward in trying to educate the populace and also influence politics. I think it is so important, and you may not get the results that you want, but if you don't try, you will never receive any results at all. It's what's that saying is, effort doesn't guarantee results, but no effort guarantees failure. And I think that's where we're at. I'm just going to keep putting in efforts and hoping for results long term. It's a bit like a startup business. You know, too many people quit their business in the second year when it's terrible and you haven't made a profit. But businesses generally take off in the 5th, 6th, and 7th year if you've really stuck it out and kept trying. And that's when you make bank, because you've had the staying power to see it through. I see too many people join a political party. I don't like this person, I quit. Join another one. I don't like this person, I quit. I don't like one thing they did. Well, we'll never love everything anyone does. But if you are clear on your values, your belief, not negotiables, and hold true to that, and don't be scared to offend people. You don't have to be friends with everyone, but stay involved. I think that's super important.
Yeah, no, awesome stuff, mate. Really appreciate that wisdom, and appreciate your time. And as we finish up, I'm going to put you on the spot. I was wondering if you'd honour me with an exit prayer. Would you be up for that?
Yeah, sure thing, Mark.
Yeah,
thank you.
That'd be awesome. I'd love it. Yep.
Heavenly Father, I thank you for this opportunity, and I thank you for the work that Mark does to try and share the truth with the people of South Australia, and just to educate them on both faith and politics, and the importance of, I think, discernment and having context in the things that we do in life. I would ask that you would grant peace to everyone who's been watching his podcasts and observing them, and give them good discernment in life to not be fearful of the things of this world. The actions of government, yes, they affect the people, but we know that Jesus paying the price on the cross is the most important thing, and it gives us great peace to know that we can go forward without fear, and to speak the truth, and to just pursue our God-given gifts in this life. I pray that we would achieve, or that your will would be done in this next state election, and that there would be faithful people elected who truly represent us and are not scared to challenge authority, and to stand up for the rights of the individual rights of the God-given rights of individual people. And I pray that you would bless Mark's work, and that it would grow, and that it would expand out across our state, and help to bring peace and knowledge to the people of South Australia. In your name we pray. Amen.
Amen. Thank you, brother. Much appreciated. God bless you, and enjoy the rest of your day, and looking forward to catching up again.
Cheers, mate. Take care. Bye.
Good evening. Could I have your attention for the next 3 minutes? I'd like you to see and hear something which we feel is rather special.
God-given land of ours, Australia, this proud possession, our own piece of earth, that was built by our fathers who pioneered our heritage. Here in Australia, the land of our birth. Our land, Australia. Our land, Australia. But should danger ever threaten us, let the world know we will answer the call.